I just finished watching The Boys Season 5 finale, and look, I'm gonna skip the pleasantries and be completely blunt with you from the very first second. I am deeply disappointed. I mean, this wasn't just another random episode of television, right? This was supposed to be the ultimate culmination, the grand finale, the explosive ending they spent 5 entire seasons meticulously building toward. Instead of feeling that breathless, unbelievable satisfaction you get when a truly legendary story sticks the landing, I'm just sitting here looking at the pieces left behind, wondering how on earth this became the final product. So let me explain this to you. We need to perform an autopsy on exactly what happened here, step by step, because there's a lot to unpack. I just have to ask you this bluntly, looking at the reality of what we were actually given. Was this the explosive, earth-shattering finish we waited half a decade for? For me, the answer is a resounding, frustrating no. Think about it. We invested hours and hours of our lives watching these deeply flawed, terrifying characters move toward what felt like an inevitable apocalyptic collision. Yet the actual climax, it just felt like a severe letdown. The tension completely fizzled out precisely when it should have detonated. This was a deeply underwhelming conclusion hiding behind the massive goodwill of 5 seasons of brilliant buildup. Now, to be totally fair, I'm not saying the entire hour was a complete write-off. No way. There were absolutely moments that worked beautifully, moments that fiercely respected the source material and the characters we've come to know. But if we're looking at it as a whole, the finale fundamentally failed to deliver the monumental payoff I, and honestly millions of others, were fully expecting to see. Section 1. The catharsis. What actually worked? Before I get into the really frustrating parts, let's take a minute to relish in the poetic justice, because when the show actually decided to deliver, it hit incredibly hard. Let's look at Homelander's demise. We all knew William Butcher was going to be the one to end him. That was literally never the question. The question was always how it would be executed. And man, watching Butcher finally get his hands on a completely depowered Homelander, just putting an absolute merciless beatdown on him, that was pure cinematic satisfaction. And then the absolute chef's kiss. Butcher pulling out that iconic crowbar, squeezing Homelander's head open and knocking out his brains. It was a perfect, gruesome, comic-accurate, full-circle moment that gave me exactly the visceral payoff I wanted for that specific years-long rivalry. Now, I know some viewers might argue that Homelander going out moaning and groaning and literally begging for his life was kinda lame or anticlimactic, but let's understand the psychology here, because that was the entire point. Homelander always acted like a giant toddler. His entire terrifying persona was built on completely unearned invincibility. So when you strip away the powers and completely shatter that god complex, what is actually left? You're left with exactly what we saw, a scared, pathetic little man. It wasn't a hero's death because, guess what? He was never a hero. It was the perfectly pathetic end he absolutely deserved. This perfectly builds into another incredibly satisfying moment, the Deep's death. I mean, this was a masterclass in narrative setup and payoff. Think about the flow of events here. Back in episode 7, the sea life essentially banned him from the ocean, a very clear, ominous warning. Then in the finale, Starlight finally gets her hands on him, delivering a brutal, vastly long overdue beatdown. But she doesn't just kill him herself. She perfectly executes his demise by feeding him to the very sea life that rejected him. And the culmination? He gets completely violated by an octopus, which brilliantly mirrors Adam's death, you know, Black Noir's acting coach, from way back in episode 5. It was dark, it was hilarious, and it was utterly deserved. To wrap up this section on catharsis, we really need to talk about Butcher's ultimate fate. I actually loved it, because let's be real for a second. Revenge was never, ever going to bring Becca back, and it was certainly never going to fix him. In Butcher's mind, nothing is ever truly enough. That is his ultimate tragedy. He won the war, he finally killed his monster, but he was always way too far gone, too fundamentally broken to ever get happy ending. You were never going to see William Butcher chilling on a sandy beach somewhere, cracking open a cold beer in the sunshine. It just wasn't going to happen. Dying was literally the only inevitable conclusion for his character arc. Section 2. The Phantom Menace, the Missing Scorched Earth. All right, now I have to shift my tone to sheer, unadulterated frustration. The show promised us a massive, world-ending event, and instead it completely abandoned its own stakes. Let's rewind a bit to season 3. Do you remember Homelander's absolutely terrifying Scorched Earth speech? He explicitly told Starlight that if the world turned against him, he would take out the nerve centers of America. He threatened to destroy the White House. He threatened to level the Pentagon. He promised to rip apart critical infrastructure and literally erase New York City off the map. This wasn't just some casual threat thrown out in anger. This was the looming shadow over the entire rest of the series. This was the promised doomsday we were all waiting for. So I want you to look at the staggering difference here. My expectation, and honestly the expectation set by all the marketing, was total global collapse. I wanted to see the lights going out around the world. I wanted a terrifying, almost analog horror vibe, where humanity is hiding in the dark as a literal living god tears the planet apart, piece by piece. And what was the reality we actually got? Homelander's death being streamed on a live TV broadcast. That's it. No cities falling, no global panic, just a live stream. The show completely pulled its punches precisely at the moment it needed to go absolutely all in on the destruction. It was so incredibly underwhelming. So the crucial point here comes down to this number, 55 million. That is the reported global viewership for the series across its entire run. Let me be very, very clear about this. When you have 55 million viewers hanging on to every single frame of your television show, you absolutely do not hold back on your grand finale. A show of this massive magnitude, ending its entire legendary run, absolutely demanded and deserved a blockbuster, movie-level budget for its climax. They should have put every single card they had on the table. Instead, it felt like the visual spectacle was completely sacrificed. Now, look, I understand the business side of this industry. There are rumors of massive budget cuts, and it seems whatever budget was actually left went straight to actor payrolls. And hey, don't get me wrong, I love this cast. Without these specific actors, the show just wouldn't exist, period. But as a viewer who is desperately looking for a narrative payoff, it is incredibly frustrating to see the promised apocalypse traded away just to balance a corporate spreadsheet. The finale of a show this culturally huge is simply not the time to be financially conservative with your visual effects and set pieces. It just isn't. Section 3. The mechanics breakdown. Where logic failed. Beyond the missing visual spectacle, the entirely broken power scaling completely shattered my immersion. Let me explain this whole V1 situation because honestly, it drove me crazy. We spent 6 entire episodes watching these characters desperately search for V1. It was hyped up endlessly as the ultimate game changer. And what did it ultimately do? It basically just granted Homelander a form of immortality, making him harder to kill. That's it. It gave him absolutely zero combat advantage, no massive power boost, no terrifying new abilities to use against the boys. 6 full episodes of narrative treasure hunting, and it functionally changed nothing about how he fought in the final battle. It was just a massive narrative dead end. And speaking of false hype, we have to talk about the lasers. When I first saw Homelander shooting those massive, high-intensity, incredibly bulky laser beams directly into the sky, my jaw literally dropped. I was sitting there thinking, oh my god, it's over. This is peak Homelander. No one is going to be able to even touch him. It felt like the perfect visual representation of him ascending to an unstoppable godlike tier. But then, nothing. It turned out to just be an empty visual flex. Those upgraded lasers played absolutely no meaningful role in making him a more dominant threat in the actual fight. Now, let's vividly map out the choreography of that final 1 versus 3 fight, Homelander versus Ryan, Butcher, and Kimiko. Visually, sure, it was fast-paced, but logically, it completely fell apart. First, you have the setup, which looks cool on paper, but then we get to Kimiko. She is literally standing there for what feels like an agonizing full minute, visibly trying to charge up her blast, all while Butcher is literally screaming at her at the top of his lungs, and Homelander, a guy who has established super hearing, completely ignores this massive threat charging up right next to him. The pacing broke down completely just to service the plot rather than following the established roles of the world we've been watching for years. Which brings me directly to the concept of the speed blitz. Let's define this real quick. It is the act of using overwhelming superhuman speed to instantly take out an opponent before they can even react. Homelander is blindingly fast. We have seen him move way faster than the human eye can track. Realistically, given the massive threat level in that room, Homelander should have speed blitzed Butcher and Kimiko in a fraction of a second. He could have literally ripped them apart before their brains even processed that he was moving. Instead, we get this deeply absurd moment. Butcher is over there desperately screaming, "Oi mate, what are you waiting for? Blast the bloody eye!" The fact that Butcher has the actual time to articulate a full, complete sentence, while Kimiko stands there acting like a buffering internet video, all while Homelander just casually lets it happen. It's ridiculous. Even if Homelander was distracted by Ryan, his super hearing would have easily picked up Butcher's scream. He could have instantly turned around, flown straight through her, and ended it on the spot. But the script absolutely needed her to hit him, so he suddenly became deaf and incredibly slow. And this brilliantly illustrates the core failure of that entire fight. The show's internal logic, the careful power scaling they established over years and years, and Homelander's terrifying god-tier combat abilities were entirely thrown out the window simply to artificially extend the runtime of the fight scene. They knew they needed a climactic battle, so they essentially nerfed the most powerful being on the planet just to make the choreography last a few extra minutes. It felt completely unearned and deeply, deeply frustrating to watch as a dedicated fan. Section 4. The Cynical Horizon. The franchise's future. As I watched those final moments play out, I had this sinking realization. This didn't actually feel like a definitive conclusion to a story I loved. It felt like a messy advertisement for future content. Let's look at the absolute bewilderment surrounding the spin-offs right now. The fact that a beloved, critically acclaimed show like Gen V was seemingly shelved or canceled just to make room for The Boys Mexico is frankly mind-boggling. I honestly thought this new show was a massive internet joke when I first heard about it. Who was asking for this? There is zero hype around it. It just feels like corporate mandates stepping right over a story audiences actually cared about, just to force a completely different, unasked-for spin-off down our throats. And then there's Vought Rising, the prequel show. The finale seemingly uses its incredibly precious closing narrative real estate to set up this other show, specifically regarding Soldier Boy's ultimate fate. But let me ask you a glaring logical question here. How does a prequel, a show inherently designed to tell us what happened way before the main story, properly reveal a post-finale fate? Unless they are planning on using some clunky flash-forward framing device, the timeline placement is incredibly confusing and entirely distracting from the story we're actually trying to finish. Now, I will absolutely admit Soldier Boy is a fantastic character, and he is without a doubt the only draw for Vought Rising. Without him, I honestly couldn't care less about another random expansion of this universe. But my heavy criticism here is the narrative choice itself. You simply do not shove messy prequel universe building into the grand finale of your flagship show. It completely cheapens the emotional weight of the ending when the final taste left in your mouth is just a glorified teaser trailer for the next corporate product coming down the assembly line. So I want to leave you with this final provocative thought to ponder. Did this once groundbreaking franchise sacrifice its chance at a legendary definitive ending just to set up a hollow cinematic universe? Did corporate greed and the desire for endless spin-offs kill the art of a proper, satisfying conclusion? Looking at the autopsy of this finale, it strongly suggests they did. I'd really love to know if you feel the same way about all of this. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next deep dive.